When I first found out, I thought my heart was going to explode. It's a cliché, I know, but there's no other way to say it. There I was, working myself to the bone, juggling 2 jobs to make ends meet and help save for this dream vacation she had been going on about for years. Italy, she wanted. Sunsets over the Amalfi Coast. Wine in Tuscany. You know, that kind of thing. She called it her soul trip, and I wanted to give her that. I really did. So, every day, I'd pull myself out of bed at dawn, grind through my regular job, then head to my evening gig. I'd come home late, exhausted, but somehow still feeling proud of myself. I thought I was doing something good for us, for our future. I was doing it for her, really. I didn't mind the long hours, the aching muscles, the fact that I barely had time for myself. I figured it'd all be worth it, picturing her face when I'd finally tell her, "Hey, babe, we've saved enough. Start packing." But then came that Tuesday night. Funny, you never think a regular Tuesday will be the day your world crashes. I got home late, as usual, and she was out, said she was at yoga, so I didn't think much of it. She'd gotten really into this new studio near our place, even made some new friends there. I thought it was great she had something she enjoyed. God, I feel like such an idiot for being so trusting. Anyway, she'd left her laptop open on the kitchen counter. I was just grabbing some water, about to shower and collapse into bed, when her screen lit up with a message. Normally, I wouldn't look. I'm not a snooper, never have been. But that night, I don't know, maybe it was some gut feeling, some sixth sense that just knew something was off. I took a quick glance, just intending to see who it was from. And that's when I saw it. It was this guy, Mark. The dude from her yoga class, apparently. I didn't recognize the name, but the message was clear as day. No context needed. He wrote, "Tonight was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. Same time tomorrow." I swear, my heart stopped. I read it again, hoping I was seeing things wrong. Hoping there was some innocent explanation. But there was nothing innocent about it. It hit me all at once, the late yoga classes, the way she'd been distant lately, the way she seemed so happy to have her own thing while I was out busting my ass for us. I felt this mix of humiliation and rage I hadn't known was possible. Here I was, working myself to the edge, and she's sneaking around with some random dude. I felt paralyzed, like my brain couldn't process it. I didn't want to believe it, but there it was. And the worst part? She didn't even try to hide it. Her laptop was just sitting there, like she didn't think I'd ever be around enough to notice. Or maybe she didn't care if I found out. I don't know which would have been worse. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to confront her that very second. But instead, I just sat there, staring at the screen, feeling this sinking, sick feeling in my gut. Everything I'd been working for, all the sacrifices, all the nights I'd come home to an empty bed and told myself it was worth it, all of it suddenly felt like the punchline to some cruel joke. I couldn't believe it. I waited up that night, my mind running in circles, wondering if I could ever even look at her the same way again. Hours passed, and she finally came home, smelling like some expensive perfume I knew wasn't hers. She had this smile on her face when she walked through the door, probably because she thought I was asleep. I pretended I was, lying there in bed, feeling the mattress sink as she slipped in beside me. It was all I could do to keep my breathing steady, to hold back the anger threatening to boil over. I didn't sleep that night. All I could think about was how she'd betrayed me, how she'd taken everything I'd worked for and tossed it aside for some fling. I felt broken, hollowed out. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to believe there was some mistake, some way to fix this. But a bigger part of me wanted her to feel even a fraction of the hurt I was feeling. And that's when the thought crept in, dark, insidious, but persistent. What if I got even? What if I showed her just how it felt to be betrayed? After that night, I was a different person. Something inside me shifted, cracked in a way that I don't know if I'll ever fully mend. I started replaying moments from the past few months, reevaluating every little thing she did, every excuse she made, every time she said she was tired or busy. I questioned every affectionate moment we'd had recently, wondering if it was all just a cover, if she was already picturing him instead of me. My mind turned paranoid, twisted, and I hated the person I was becoming. But I couldn't confront her. Not yet. Maybe I was scared of hearing her say it out loud, scared that confirming it would make it all too real. So, I held on to the anger, let it fester. She'd get up in the mornings, same as always, give me this quick, distracted kiss, like I was just a roommate passing by, and I'd clench my fists, biting back everything I wanted to scream at her. She had no idea I knew. It was around this time that her sister, Erin, came into the picture. Erin and I had always been friendly, nothing more than that. She was a few years younger, the wild one in the family, the one who'd always kind of lived on her own terms. We joked around over the years, shared drinks at family gatherings, but that was it. She was my wife's sister, after all. Off limits, unthinkable. But one night, a few days after I found out about the affair, Erin called me. It was out of the blue, which was weird because we never really talked one-on-one. She said she'd heard I was working myself into the ground, and that I should take a night off for once. She invited me out for a drink. Part of me knew I should say no, that I wasn't in any state to be out socializing, especially not with her sister. But another part of me, the part that was furious, broken, and wanting some kind of escape, said, why not? So, I went. I met her at this low-key bar across town, far enough from home that I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. She was waiting for me when I arrived, already on her second drink, dressed in this tight black dress that left nothing to the imagination. I remember thinking how different she looked, how much she reminded me of my wife in some ways, but with this edge, this wildness my wife had never had. We started drinking. Talking. I was quiet at first, trying to keep my anger bottled up, but Erin, she has this way of getting you to open up. I didn't mean to tell her about the affair. I really didn't. But maybe I just needed to unload, needed someone to hear me. Eventually, it all came spilling out. I told her everything, how I'd found out, how I was killing myself working 2 jobs for someone who didn't give a damn about me, how I'd felt my entire world shatter the second I saw that text. I even told her about the vacation, about all the sacrifices I'd been making for her sister's dream trip. By the end of it, my hands were shaking, my face flushed from both the alcohol and the rush of emotions. Erin just listened, her face a mix of anger and sympathy. She cursed under her breath a few times, muttering things like, I can't believe she'd do that to you, and, she's such an idiot. She even reached out, placing a hand on mine across the table, her thumb lightly tracing circles over my skin. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, I swear it felt like the first real comfort I'd felt in days. She wasn't looking at me with pity or judgment, just understanding. And then, after a pause, she said something that I'll never forget. You deserve better than this, she said, her voice low but steady. If she can't see that, well, maybe someone else will. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd been so wrapped up in my anger, in my betrayal, that I hadn't stopped to think about my own worth. I'd convinced myself that this was all somehow my fault, that maybe I wasn't good enough for my wife, that maybe this was what I deserved. But hearing someone say it out loud, hearing her say it, it made me feel something else. A flicker of pride, maybe, or just the faintest glimmer of self-respect. Like maybe I wasn't as broken as I thought. I don't remember who leaned in first. Maybe it was her, maybe it was me. All I remember is the feeling of her lips, soft and warm, tasting faintly of whiskey. There was this moment where time seemed to stop, where I forgot about everything else, the betrayal, the hurt, the anger, and just let myself get lost in the feeling of being wanted. I didn't think about consequences, didn't think about the fallout. I just wanted, needed, to feel something other than pain. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, we were back at her place. It's a blur, honestly. I remember the heat, the intensity, the way she pulled me close like she'd been waiting for this as much as I had. I remember the way she looked at me, like I was worth something, like I wasn't just some guy who'd been cast aside. I remember thinking, in those fleeting moments, that maybe this was my way of balancing the scales, of showing my wife that I wasn't just some doormat she could walk all over. But as the night wore on, as things slowed down and reality began to creep back in, I felt that familiar knot of guilt tightening in my chest. I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. I'd done something I couldn't take back. And as I lay there in the dark, Aaron asleep beside me, I started to wonder if maybe, in trying to get even, I'd only dug myself deeper into a pit I couldn't escape. The next morning, I woke up in a haze, reality slamming into me the second I opened my eyes. Erin was still asleep beside me, her hair spread across the pillow, her breathing soft and steady. For a brief, blissful second, I let myself enjoy the quiet. But then the memories of the night before came rushing back, and with them, the guilt. It felt like a stone in my stomach, heavy and unmovable. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could, pulling on my clothes and trying to collect my thoughts. I'd gone there last night wanting revenge, wanting her sister to feel even a fraction of the pain I'd felt when I found out she was cheating. But now, in the cold light of day, it all just felt wrong. Messy. Like I'd lowered myself to her level, dragged myself through the same mud. And the worst part was, none of it erased what she'd done. It didn't make me feel better. If anything, it just made me feel emptier. Erin stirred as I was about to leave, her eyes fluttering open, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. I could see the flicker of realization in her face, the way her expression shifted from sleepy contentment to something darker, something uncertain. She sat up, pulling the covers around herself, and I didn't know what to say. How do you even start to explain something like this? I should go, I mumbled, fumbling for words. She nodded, her face unreadable, but there was a sadness in her eyes that I wasn't prepared for. She didn't ask me to stay, didn't try to justify what had happened. She just looked at me, and in that look, I could feel the weight of what we'd both done. We were both adults, we both knew this wasn't a good idea from the start. But in our mutual pain, we'd made a choice, and now we'd have to live with it. Take care of yourself, she finally said, her voice quiet, almost like she knew this was the last time we'd be alone like this. I gave her a nod, mumbled some sort of goodbye, and left without looking back. The drive home was surreal. I felt like a stranger in my own skin, replaying everything over and over in my head, wondering how the hell I'd ended up here. I was supposed to be the good guy. I was supposed to be the one who sacrificed, who worked hard, who loved unconditionally. But now, I was just as guilty, just as flawed. I'd let my anger drive me to a place I never thought I'd go, and the worst part was, I couldn't even say I regretted it. Not entirely. When I got home, my wife was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I walked in, her expression neutral, almost bored, like I was just another part of her morning routine. There was no guilt in her face, no sign that she'd spent the night worrying about where I was or what I might know. She was so damn casual about everything, like my absence hadn't even registered. And that hurt more than anything. I dropped my keys on the counter and just stood there, looking at her, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. I wanted to confront her, to scream, to throw her betrayal back in her face, to tell her I knew about her little yoga buddy and that I wasn't some clueless fool. But instead, I just felt empty. Like I'd already used up all my anger, and there was nothing left. "Where were you?" she asked, not looking up from her phone. Her tone was casual, barely curious, as if she didn't really care what my answer was. "Out," I replied, my voice flat. She didn't press further, didn't seem to notice the edge in my tone, the bitterness that seeped into every word. I wondered if she even remembered what it felt like to care. Days went by, and I kept waiting for her to confess, to slip up, to show even a hint of remorse. I waited for some sign that she felt guilty, that maybe she regretted what she'd done. But there was nothing. She went on with her life as if nothing had happened, as if I was just some background character in her story, someone who didn't really matter. And that's when I realized the truth: she wasn't going to confess. She wasn't going to apologize, because she didn't feel like she'd done anything wrong. In her mind, she was entitled to her little affair, her soul-searching, or whatever she called it. She didn't see me, didn't see the sacrifices I'd made, the hours I'd put in to try and give her the life she wanted. I was just convenient. A paycheck. A placeholder. That realization cut deeper than anything. I'd been holding on to this idea that maybe there was still something worth saving, that maybe we could fix things if we both just tried. But how do you fix something when the other person doesn't even think it's broken? In the weeks that followed, I kept my distance, emotionally checked out, going through the motions but already planning my exit. I started looking into divorce lawyers, quietly gathering documents, preparing myself for the inevitable fallout. I knew it would be messy, that it would rip through our lives and tear apart everything we'd built, but at that point, I didn't care. I just wanted out. I wanted to be free of her, free of the lies, free of the endless cycle of resentment and betrayal. And as for Erin, well, we didn't talk about that night. She texted me once, just a simple, "Hope you're doing okay." I replied with a quick, polite response, but that was it. We both knew it was a one-time thing, a mistake born out of shared pain, and neither of us wanted to drag it out or make it more complicated than it already was. Still, there's a part of me that wonders if things could have been different, if maybe I'd handled it better, if maybe I hadn't let my anger consume me. But it's too late for that now. The damage is done. I made my choices, just like she made hers, and now all that's left is to pick up the pieces and try to move forward. The days bled into each other, each one feeling like another punch to the gut. Living in the same house, pretending everything was normal, acting like I didn't know she was sneaking around while I was out working myself to exhaustion, it was a level of mental torture I wouldn't wish on anyone. I didn't say a word to her about what I knew. I just kept quiet, kept my head down, and did what I had to do to survive each day. In some twisted way, I started finding comfort in the silence. We moved around each other like strangers, and that was fine with me. She didn't ask where I was, I didn't ask where she was, and we both just went through the motions. I know it sounds messed up, but there was something satisfying about knowing I had my own secrets, something she didn't know. That I'd taken something back, even if it was in the most screwed up way imaginable. Then one night, everything came to a head. I'd been out working late, doing a double shift, and when I got home, I found her sitting at the kitchen table. She looked up as I walked in, and for the first time in weeks, there was something different in her eyes, an edge, a sharpness. I didn't know what had changed, but I felt a chill run down my spine. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice cold, demanding. It was almost laughable, her acting like she had any right to question me after everything she'd done. But I wasn't laughing. "Working," I replied, keeping my voice steady. I didn't give her the satisfaction of reacting, didn't let on that her question had thrown me off. I knew this conversation was coming eventually, and I'd been preparing myself for it, rehearsing what I'd say when the time came. She looked down, fidgeting with her hands, and I could tell there was something she was holding back. Part of me wondered if she was finally going to admit it, if she was going to tell me about her little yoga fling. I could see the guilt flickering in her eyes, or maybe it was just the exhaustion from trying to keep her lies straight. Either way, I braced myself, waiting for her to finally come clean. But what she said instead took me completely off guard. "I know about you and Erin," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. The words hung in the air like a bomb, detonating everything I'd been holding back. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I'd been so wrapped up in my own anger, in my own betrayal, that I hadn't even considered the possibility that she might find out. Excuse me. I managed to say, though my voice came out shaky, betraying the calm I was trying so hard to hold on to. She looked up at me, her face pale, her eyes full of something I couldn't quite read, anger, hurt, maybe even a hint of satisfaction. Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about. Erin told me. She couldn't live with herself, I guess, so she confessed everything. My mind went blank, racing to process what she was saying. Erin had told her. Why? How? We hadn't spoken since that night. I thought we'd both silently agreed to bury it, to let it be a mistake we'd both forget. But now, here it was, dragged out into the open, a new layer of mess on top of everything else. What do you want me to say? I finally replied, my voice harsher than I intended. I didn't even feel defensive, I felt tired. Worn out. You've been sneaking around with that guy from your yoga class for God knows how long. Don't act like you're some innocent victim here. She flinched, but I could see her trying to hold her ground, her face hardening as she glared at me. So that makes it okay? You thought because I made a mistake, you could just, what, sleep with my sister and call it even? Oh, now it's a mistake. I spat, feeling the anger boiling up. That's convenient. And yeah, maybe I did want to call it even. Maybe I was sick of being the only one who cared about us, about what we were supposed to be building together. You didn't think about me when you were sneaking around with him, did you? For the first time, I saw her composure crack. Her face twisted, her voice trembling. Do you think I wanted things to end up like this? Do you think I haven't been feeling miserable too? I didn't plan any of this. I was just. I don't know, I was lonely, okay? You're always working, always gone. And it felt like you'd rather be anywhere but here, with me. I stared at her, stunned. I wanted to yell, to call her out, to tell her how hypocritical she was being. But her words stopped me cold, the same way Erin's words had hit me that night at the bar. Somewhere, beneath all the layers of anger and resentment, there was something real in what she was saying. She was lonely. She felt abandoned. I'd been so focused on my own sacrifices, on how hard I was working for us, that I hadn't even noticed her slipping away. It was like looking at a stranger. I realized, in that moment, that we'd both been living in our own little worlds, wrapped up in our own pain, too stubborn or too proud to reach out to each other. She'd found comfort in someone else's arms, and I'd done the same. We were both at fault, both so consumed by our own resentment that we'd torn each other apart without even realizing it. But acknowledging that didn't make it any easier. I didn't feel sympathy, didn't feel forgiveness. I just felt numb. Tired of fighting, tired of caring, tired of the whole damn mess. So, what now? I asked, my voice flat, devoid of any emotion. I didn't know what I expected her to say, but at that point, I just wanted an answer. I wanted closure, something that would finally let me walk away from this whole train wreck. She looked down, her eyes filling with tears, and for a moment, I thought she might actually apologize, that maybe we'd find a way to pick up the pieces. But then she took a deep breath, composed herself, and shook her head. I think it's over, she said, her voice barely audible. We've both done things we can't take back. And maybe we're both just too damaged to fix this. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. I didn't feel sadness, or anger, or regret. Just relief. Like a weight had finally been lifted, like I could finally stop pretending, stop trying to fix something that had been broken beyond repair long before either of us had the courage to admit it. She packed a bag that night and went to stay with a friend. And just like that, it was over. Years of love, trust, memories, all of it gone in a single night. I thought I'd feel more, that I'd be devastated, but all I felt was an overwhelming sense of emptiness. As I sat there in the quiet of our empty home, I started to realize the full extent of what we'd both done, the lines we'd crossed, the people we'd hurt. I'd destroyed a part of myself in trying to hurt her, and she'd done the same. And now, all that was left were the ruins of everything we'd once promised each other. I thought about calling Erin, about telling her that I didn't blame her, that maybe we were both just victims of a situation we couldn't control. But I knew it wouldn't make a difference. The damage was done, and there was no going back. As I sat there alone, I started to understand that this wasn't just about revenge, or betrayal, or even love. This was about two people who'd lost themselves somewhere along the way, who'd let anger and resentment consume them until there was nothing left. The days after she left were eerily quiet. I found myself wandering through our house, looking at the things we'd collected over the years, photos, souvenirs, little pieces of our life together that once meant something. Now, they just felt like hollow reminders of what we'd lost, a life we'd both walked away from. I couldn't bring myself to pack any of it up yet, so I just left everything as it was, frozen in time. I didn't reach out to her, and she didn't reach out to me. We'd both agreed that we needed space, a clean break, and as much as I hated the idea of giving up, I knew deep down it was the only way forward. I'd spent years sacrificing for us, trying to build a future, but somewhere along the way, we'd stopped being a team. We were just two people going through the motions, pretending we were still in love because we didn't know how to do anything else. The hardest part was coming to terms with the fact that I wasn't blameless. I wanted so badly to make her the villain, to see myself as the wounded, selfless husband who'd been wronged. But if I was being honest with myself, I knew that wasn't the whole story. Yeah, she was the first to break the trust, but I wasn't far behind. I could have confronted her, could have tried to work through it, could have chosen the high road. Instead, I went down the path of revenge, and in doing so, I betrayed myself just as much as I betrayed her. Erin texted me once, maybe a week after everything went down. It was a long, apologetic message where she tried to explain why she told her sister about our night together. She said she couldn't live with the guilt, that it was eating her up inside. She said she hoped I could forgive her, but I could tell she was mostly just trying to find some peace for herself. I didn't respond. It wasn't because I was angry at her, or because I blamed her. I just didn't know what to say. We'd both acted out of hurt, both made choices we couldn't take back, and now we'd have to live with them. I didn't want to drag it out, didn't want to keep reliving that night in some endless cycle of guilt and regret. So, I let her message sit there, unanswered, a final goodbye that felt fitting for the mess we'd made. Eventually, I started moving things out of the house. I didn't keep much, just a few essentials, some clothes, my laptop. I let her take whatever she wanted, told her she could have the furniture, the dishes, the memories. I didn't need any of it. I felt like I was shedding an old skin, leaving behind a life that didn't fit anymore. I found a small apartment on the other side of town. It was nothing special, just a one-bedroom with a creaky floor and a view of a parking lot, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I had my own space, my own little corner of the world where I could try to figure out who I was outside of us. It was strange, waking up alone, going through the day without anyone to check in with. But it was also freeing. I could breathe again, without the weight of resentment pressing down on me. In the quiet of that apartment, I started to reflect on everything, trying to make sense of what went wrong. I realized I'd spent so much time trying to be the perfect husband, the provider, the guy who made sacrifices without ever questioning what I was getting in return. I'd been so wrapped up in being good that I'd lost sight of what I actually needed, what I wanted out of life. And in doing so, I'd left space for all that anger to build up, unspoken, until it exploded in the worst way possible. As much as it hurt to admit, I knew that what we'd had wasn't real love, not anymore. Maybe it was, once upon a time, when we were young and idealistic, before life wore us down. But somewhere along the line, we stopped seeing each other as people, as partners. She became the person I worked for, sacrificed for, resented for not appreciating me enough. And I don't even know what I became to her. Maybe just someone who was there, someone dependable, but not someone she was truly connected to. In the months that followed, I started to put myself back together, piece by piece. I stopped working 2 jobs, started focusing on the things that actually made me happy. I picked up old hobbies I hadn't touched in years, reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from. I didn't dive into dating, honestly, the thought of a relationship still felt like a wound that hadn't fully healed, but I started opening myself up to the idea that maybe, one day, I'd be ready to try again. As for her, I don't know where she is now. Last I heard, she'd moved out of town, maybe to get a fresh start somewhere else. Part of me hopes she finds whatever it is she's looking for, that maybe she figures out why she did what she did and finds a way to make peace with it. I don't wish her ill, even after everything. I think we both went through hell, and maybe, in some strange way, we're both better off for it. Looking back, I still feel a pang of regret, a sense of sadness for what could have been if we both handled things differently. But I know now that holding on to that regret doesn't do me any good. I made mistakes. She made mistakes. We're human. And as much as it hurts, sometimes the best thing you can do is let go and move on. In the end, the only person I could control was myself. And while I'm not proud of everything I did, I'm learning to forgive myself, to understand that I was a guy in pain, a guy who felt lost and betrayed and didn't know how to cope. I'm learning to accept that part of myself, even the parts one don't like. So here I am, alone but healing, slowly rebuilding a life I can be proud of. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm moving in the right direction. And maybe that's enough.